Chapter 1 Confused Demon King Luosheng stared at the engraved silver incense ball under the emerald green curtain. His eyes that used to look forward to the sky seemed a little dull at the moment, and because of this, the chattering of the little maid in his ear became louder. "Girl, isn't it just Mr. Su? You just grab it as soon as you see it, it's not worth hanging yourself for him." Luosheng moved his eyes, and looked at the little maid who was crying on the bedside. This maid is called Hengdu, and she can speak and cry. It has been 3 days since she heard such magical sounds, which is enough for her to have a general understanding of the current situation. She is the daughter of the powerful Governor Luo, who was sent to her grandfather's house because of getting into trouble. "Isn't this a fool? Don't cry," Luosheng said. His voice was hoarse, and his throat was burning. The crying sound stopped abruptly, and Hengdu looked up in surprise. "Girl, you are finally willing to speak." Before Hengdu could say anything more, the Siang bamboo curtain was lifted suddenly, and a girl rushed in like a whirlwind, and behind her came the exclamation of the maid outside, "Miss, cousin is resting." The girl who rushed in front of Luosheng pointed at her and scolded unceremoniously, "Luosheng, do you want to lose some face? In order to get Mr. Su," he cried, "made trouble and hanged himself. Now my grandmother asked my mother to go to Su's house to discuss marriage. You got your wish, didn't you?" Luosheng turned to look at the angry girl. At the age of 14 or 15, his cheeks were stained with 2 shades of red due to anger, and he was as vibrant as the morning glow. Hengdu jumped up directly, more angry than a girl, bold. "How dare you talk to our girl like this?" The girl spat, her eyes full of contempt. "Luosheng, I'm not afraid of you if others are afraid of you. If you have the ability, let those people arrest the entire Sheng family." The servant girl of the Sheng family turned pale with shock when she heard this. "Miss, you should go back first. Miss cousin is not well yet." Anxious this cousin girl, maybe she will order those Jinlin guards to arrest the entire Sheng family. Jinlin Wei, ruthless and cold-blooded, can even attack his own relatives, so what is the grandfather's family? A youthful clear voice sounded from the door, "Big cousin, why are you in my sister's room?" The girl looked towards the door, her tone softened unconsciously. "Didn't my cousin hear that my mother went to Su's house?" The boy walked in, took a deep look at Luosheng who was calm, and then said to the girl, "I heard, but this is a decision made by the elders. It's useless for the eldest cousin to come to my sister. Let's go back." The girl looked surprised. Cousin actually turned to Luosheng? Although Luochen and Luosheng are brothers and sisters, they came to their Sheng family to raise their bodies 7 years ago. After all these years, the entire family has long regarded their cousin as a family. When Luosheng first came here a few days ago, she watched coldly that her cousin was indifferent to her own sister. Now why, no matter what, the girl gave her cousin this face, glared at Luosheng angrily, and said, "I'm waiting to see you and second young master Su raise their eyebrows in the same case." After finishing speaking, the girl lifted the curtain and left. The bamboo curtain swayed gently, leaving the 2 siblings looking at each other. The 12 or 13-year-old boy had red lips and white teeth, and he had a good appearance, but his thin figure and fair complexion made him look a little weak. The young man who was speaking for Luosheng just now suddenly turned cold. He didn't hide the annoyance and anger in his eyes. He gritted his teeth and said, "Luosheng, if you see a handsome man, you want to post it. Can you be a little ashamed?" Hengdu couldn't help but feel sorry for her girl. Second young master Su is not only a bit pretty. Are there girls such low-sided people? Only a little beauty will not be rare. Luochen didn't look at Hengdu, but still stared at Luosheng closely. Luosheng finally spoke, "You were defending me just now." Her voice was a little hoarse due to her throat injury, but her tone was not questioning, but determined. Luochen was stunned, a trace of surprise flashed in those beautiful eyes, and then he became angry from embarrassment. "You don't have to be sentimental, I just defended you because you are a sibling with me, and others point at your nose and scold me. Glory? Now that my aunt is going to the Sua family to talk about your marriage, I just hope you can put on a show in the future and don't want to be ashamed again. Luo Sheng, who was scolded by his own brother, raised his eyebrows and asked, "You mean this marriage can be done?" Luo Chen was startled again, his face flushed instantly with anger. He scolded so much, she didn't listen to anything, and only worried about whether the marriage with Su Yao would be successful. How could he have such a sister? Luo Chen clenched his fists tightly, angry and powerless. Is this marriage possible? Luo Sheng asked calmly as if he didn't see his younger brother's anger. Luo Chen closed his eyes, took a deep breath, suppressed the urge to walk away, and said with a sneer, "You force your grandmother by crying, making trouble, and hanging yourself. How dare grandma refuse to follow you? The Sheng family and the Sua family are family friends, and their father is high and powerful. If the uncle and mother go to the Sua family to discuss this marriage, the Sua family will agree to it in all likelihood." Luo Sheng, who had been leaning against the head of the bed, suddenly straightened up, and Hengdu hurriedly supported her arm. "Girl, what are you doing?" Luo Sheng's feet had landed on the ground, he stabilized his weak body, and said lightly, "Go to Su's house, you lead the way." Hengdu didn't ask another word, and immediately responded crisply, and walked out with Luo Sheng supported. Luo Chen stood there blankly for a moment, then hurriedly chased after him. The orange tree planted in the courtyard of Funing Hall has not yet bloomed, and the old lady Sheng sighed in the room. "I just hope that this girl can settle down after the marriage is settled, and I can sleep peacefully for a few days." The woman on the side is the second wife of the Sheng family, the second aunt of the Luo Sheng siblings. Hearing this, she sneered in her heart at this moment, with this cousin girl here, it is no wonder that the Sheng family is stable. Supervisor Luo Data sent someone to bring this cousin girl to the letter, asking the old lady to help Luo Sheng find a good marriage. Thinking about this, the second wife wanted to beat her thigh. This is to marry Luo Sheng in Jinsha County, and from then on they will depend on their Sheng family. Old lady Sheng ordered the maidservant who came to report the news, "Call the eldest girl to come." Not long after, the girl who went to Luo Sheng's place to yell and scold came in, saluting gracefully, "I met grandma, second aunt." Old lady Sheng called the young girl to come forward, and said, "Jiahu, don't make trouble with your cousin in the future, she is a guest in our house." The old lady thought about her granddaughter, and sighed secretly, "That girl, as long as she doesn't cause trouble, she will be thankful." Sheng Jiahu was quite unconvinced. Just as she was about to speak, she saw a maid hurried in and said anxiously, "Old lady, Biao girl has gone to Su's house." Old lady Sheng's face suddenly changed, and she couldn't help but look at the second wife. Sheng Jiahu's eyes were full of anger, and she ran out holding her skirt. "Grandma, let me go and see." Old lady Sheng was silent for a long time, patted the coffee table and murmured, "What a sinner! How could her gentle and polite daughter who died young give birth to such a demon king?" Hello everyone, we meet again. New book collection please recommendation ticket. End of this chapter. Chapter 2 The Twisted Melon is not sweet. The atmosphere in the Sua family across the street from Shenfo was very tense. In the house, the eldest wife of the Sheng family and the mistress of the Sua family were discussing their marriage, while in the yard stood a few juniors, all of them with angry faces. "Second brother, why don't you go in and tell mother? What if mother really agrees?" A girl in a green shirt looked anxious and tugged at the sleeve of a boy. The young man was about 16 or 17 years old. He was Su Yao, the second son of the Sua family. He was a well-known handsome man in Jinsha County and even Jinling Mansion. He looked like Pan and Song Yu. Su Yao supported the magnolia tree in the courtyard full of flowers, and looked calmly at the door of the house. Another girl in a pomegranate skirt snorted, and said angrily, "Sister, don't talk nonsense. How can mother agree to someone like Luo Sheng?" Miss Su glanced at her younger sister, and lowered her voice, "Don't forget Luo Sheng's identity." The second girl Su froze, stomping her feet angrily, "So what? our Sua family is not ordinary people, so why is second brother's marriage still being persecuted? The Sua family is a prominent family in Jinsha, and they cultivated and studied in the heirloom. Over the past 100 years, there have been many court officials, and no one in the local area would dare to mess with them. But Luo Sheng's father is the governor, in charge of Jinlinwei, so why does he care about this? Miss Sua felt a little annoyed at her sister's naivety when she thought about it. At this moment, Su Yao said, "Don't quarrel, two younger sisters. Marriage is a matter of parents' orders and matchmakers' words. Mother will take care of it for me." His gentle voice and calm expression made the two girls even more anxious. "What if my mother nods?" Miss Sua asked, biting her lips. Su Yao turned his eyes to the door of the house again, his eyes darkened, then listened to mother. "Second brother!" The two girls shouted together. The sound of hurried footsteps came, and the three of them looked over, and it was the younger brother who was standing at the gate running over. Brother Sua is only 8 or 9 years old, his cheeks flushed from running, and he said loudly, "It's not good, Luo Sheng is here." It seemed that what came was not a girl, but a scourge. Su Yao stroked Su Xiaodai's head, and said in a gentle voice, "Don't call her by her name, call her Miss Luo, or Sister Luo." When Luo Sheng walked over, he happened to hear this faint voice. Mild, but not much warmth. Miss Su dashed forward, stood in front of Su Yao, and shouted, "What are you doing here?" Luo Sheng looked at her, as if he saw a nobleman standing in front of the beautiful woman, scolding the apprentice who wanted to rob the woman. The beautiful woman Luo Sheng's eyes fell on Su Yao. The young man was wearing a moon-white gown, his complexion was like jade, and his hair was as long as a crow. He was thinner and more eye-catching than the magnolia trees behind him. Su Yao was about to frown when he realized that Luo Sheng's eyes had moved away from him. Luo Sheng stared at the door of the house and said, "I heard that my eldest aunt was discussing my marriage with Mrs. Su, so I came here." Miss Su was so angry that her hands shook, she pointed at Luo Sheng and cursed, "How can you say such a thing? It's not enough to force the Sheng family to propose a marriage with death, but you actually came in person. In this world, how can there be such a shameless person like you in this world? People!" The little girl had tears in her eyes. She was really going crazy, but the elders told her not to provoke Luo Sheng, saying that it would cause trouble for the Su family. Miss Su held her younger sister's hand and looked a little calmer. "Miss Luo, the elders are discussing matters right now, you should go back and wait for news. You are not welcome in the Su mansion, you are polluting the Su family by standing here." Miss Su didn't say these words, but she didn't know how many times they circled them in her heart. "Follow me back." Luo Chen chased after him, angrily grabbing Luo Sheng's wrist. Luo Sheng didn't move. Under the watchful eyes of the brothers and sisters of the Su family, Luo Chen's face burst into heat. He gritted his teeth and said in a low voice, "Do you really want to stay here to shame yourself?" Luo Sheng patted Luo Chen's head, and said calmly, "I'll go in and talk before I leave." The 13-year-old boy was an inch shorter than the tall Luo Sheng before he reached his height. Luo Sheng made such movements inexplicably harmoniously. Everyone forgot to respond, including Luo Chen whose head was being touched. Until Luo Sheng's back disappeared at the door of the house, Luo Chen who reacted turned pale with anger. Her, how dare she touch his head? The little girl Hengdu who didn't follow along smiled and explained for Luo Sheng, "Our girl likes you. Girls wouldn't take a look at them if they were ugly, even if they were their own brothers." Luo Chen's face turned from white to red, and he uttered a word coldly, "Get lost." He needs Luo Sheng to like him? Such a sister, if he can save him from losing a little bit, he should be grateful. Ahem. Luo Chen coughed because his emotions were too agitated. Luo Chen is weak, so he was sent to live in Jinsha, where the climate is pleasant, when he was young. Everyone who is familiar with the Sheng family knows this. Seeing this, the brothers and sisters of the Su family became concerned and inquired. At this moment, Sheng Jiao arrived, looked around and asked, "Where's Luo Sheng?" Miss Su said lightly, "Go in." Second, Miss Su has a good relationship with Sheng Jiao, and she spoke unabashedly, "Sister Jiao, why didn't you stop her and let her come to my house like this?" This is because I was afraid that my mother would disagree, so I went to the battle to discuss the marriage in person." Sheng Jiao's face flushed with embarrassment at what she said, and Luo Chen couldn't wait to find a crack in the ground to get in. "I'll take her back." Luo Chen strode towards the door. In the east room, Mrs. Shengda and Mrs. Su were equally astonished when Luo Sheng came in. "Why is Biao Miss here?" Mrs. Shengda asked softly, but her heart was filled with overwhelming disgust. She has never seen such a girl in her life. The Sheng family and the Su family have a good relationship, and the two families have frequent exchanges. She has been a guest in this room countless times, but she has never been as uncomfortable as she is now, and her face has been swept away. If someone told her son a girl like Luo Sheng, she would want to pick up the vase and throw that person out. She is the one doing such disgusting things now. But what can be done? Luo Sheng even hanged himself for the sake of the second son of the Su family. Whether it is true or not, in case something goes wrong, how will the Sheng family explain to Governor Luo? By that time, not to mention the Sheng family, even the Su family may not be able to escape the disaster of ruining their family. Knowing the consequences, Mrs. Su almost nodded her head in agreement despite her reluctance. "What is Luo Sheng doing here at this time?" Luo Sheng bowed his knees and bowed to Mrs. Shengda and Mrs. Su, and said, "Auntie, I'll take you home." Mrs. Shengda was shocked by Luo Sheng's never-before-seen etiquette, and couldn't help asking, "Does Miss Biao know what I'm here for?" The corners of Luo Sheng's lips curved slightly. "I know that my aunt is here to discuss my marriage with Mrs. Su's wife, but let's let this marriage go." "Why?" Shocked, Mrs. Shengda and Mrs. Su asked in unison. At the door, Sheng Jiao and the others were surprised. Luo Sheng smiled, "Because twisted melons are not sweet." "Auntie, let's go back." Until Luo Sheng and the others left, the second girl Su still had an expression of seeing a ghost, and said in disbelief, "She also knows that a twisted melon is not sweet." The new issue is updated every day. Seedlings need the help of recommendation votes. Thank you for voting for Zhang Huan. End of this chapter. Chapter 3. A dream. For 12 years the second girl Su had a dull expression, and pinched Su Xiaodai, "Isn't it a dream?" Brother Su let out a scream, "It hurts." The second girl Su breathed a sigh of relief, "It's just that it hurts, it's really not a dream." "Second brother, you escaped unharmed." Mrs. Su came back to her senses at this moment, seeing Fengshan's handsome son bursting into tears, but they were tears of joy. The son really escaped. If it wasn't for the young and old of the Su family, how could she endure the nausea and listen to Mrs. Shenda say those words? Su Yao stepped forward and patted Mrs. Su's arm, "It's because my son is not good. I'm tired of you." He turned his eyes to the door, thinking of Luo Sheng's performance, which was very different from the past. He was a bit puzzled. Will Luo Sheng let him go? Miss Su commanded the servant girl to sweep the inside and outside of the house. Her voice was brisk, "Everyone should move quickly, and sweep away the bad luck." The maidservants laughed crisply, "Miss, don't worry, the servant girls will clean up well." The whole family of the Sheng family who left from the Su mansion felt much heavier. Sheng Jiao approached Luo Sheng, gritted her teeth and asked, "Luo Sheng, what tricks are you playing?" Mrs. Shenda glanced at her daughter, and said with a warning, "Jiao, is there any rule? Call me cousin." Mother Sheng Jiao stomped her feet unconvinced. She is a few months younger than Luo Sheng, so she should be called cousin, but Luo Sheng doesn't look like a cousin at all, so she can't say it. Mrs. Shenda didn't understand her daughter's mood. After pretending to reprimand her, she asked Luo Sheng, "Why is cousin so unwilling all of a sudden?" If one of the second sons of the Su family is sacrificed, so that the Sheng and Su families and even the entire Jinsha county can live in peace, it is actually okay. Luo Sheng frowned slightly. Auntie hopes that my marriage with second young master Su will be successful. These words almost scared Shang Jiao to death, and she yanked Mrs. Shenda's sleeve. Mrs. Shengda didn't dare to ask any more questions, so she couldn't help but quicken her pace. The two families of Sheng and Su are not far from each other. The group quickly returned to Sheng's mansion and went straight to Funing Hall to see Mrs. Sheng. Old Lady Sheng's heart was fluttering, and when she saw Luo Sheng came back, she hurriedly asked why. Luo Sheng was blessed, and said lightly, "Perhaps my grandmother misunderstood, I never thought of getting engaged to second young master Su. Shenger is not feeling well, so I'm going back to my room first." As soon as Luo Sheng left, old Madame Sheng couldn't hold back anymore, and asked Luo Chen worriedly, "Chener, is your sister looking at someone else again?" Luo Chen's face was as dark as the bottom of a pot, and he tried to defend himself. Sister is not someone who is so quick to change her mind. He has to watch carefully this time. If Luo Sheng dares to act recklessly, he will beat her to death. Sheng Jiao patted Luo Chen on the shoulder with a serious face. "Cousin, you must not know your sister." The old lady Sheng sighed and signaled the two to step back, leaving the two daughters-in-law to discuss countermeasures. "Since Governor Luo entrusted Shenger's marriage to my grandmother, I think the sooner Shenger's marriage is settled, the better. If this continues, the Sheng family will offend all the people in Jinsha County." The eldest wife and the second wife agreed. What the old lady said is very true. Old Lady Sheng raised her hand and rubbed her temples, with a regretful expression on her face. "But that girl doesn't want to marry the Su family anymore. Which one do you think is suitable?" The eldest wife laughed dryly. "The cousin girl has high vision, and I'm afraid it will be difficult to find a suitable one for a while." "Yes, looking at Jinsha, there are not many young men who can be worthy of a cousin girl." The second wife followed. She heard that several families have sent their handsome sons to study and travel, just to escape from the claws of the cousin girl. This is really embarrassing. Old Lady Sheng glanced at the two daughters-in-law, and said what she planned in her heart. "Shenger has 3 cousins and a cousin, all of the same age, why not choose one of them? The Sheng family has been kind to others for many years. They are kind people. Instead of letting that girl harm others, it is better to stay at home. After all, she was that girl's grandmother, and there would be no big trouble with her." Old Lady Sheng's words were like a thunderbolt that almost killed the two daughter-in-laws. The eldest wife stood up abruptly, holding her forehead and shaking her head. "My daughter-in-law has heart palpitations again, and I want to go back to the room and take a Baoxin pill." The second wife hurriedly supported the eldest wife. "My daughter-in-law sends my sister-in-law back to her room." In the blink of an eye, none of the two daughters-in-law were left, leaving only the old lady sullen. Is there no one who is generally willing to sacrifice? She really missed it. Luo Sheng had just entered the room when Hong Do leaned over and asked with a smile, "Miss, have you fallen in love with another young master again? Who do you think it is? I'll get it back for you." Luo Sheng poured himself a cup of tea, took 2 sips, and stared at the floating green buds in the teacup. Hong Do has never seen her girl so quiet. She felt a little strange for a while, and asked cautiously, "Girl, what's wrong with you?" Luo Sheng looked up at Hong Du. Although the words uttered by the little maid were so ridiculous, the worry on her face was real. Luo Sheng held the teacup slightly harder with his fingertips, and asked the words that had been hovering in his mind since he woke up. "Hong Du, do you know the Chinese prince's mansion?" She is not Luo Sheng, the beloved daughter of Governor Luo, but Princess Qingyang of Zhenyi's palace. She died and woke up again. Her soul was trapped in someone else's body, but she didn't know anything about this person's situation, so she had to use all her strength to control the overwhelming hatred and pain before she died, and calmly understand the current situation. Zhenyi's prince's mansion. Hong Do thought about it seriously, with a blank expression. "I haven't heard of it." Luo Sheng's heart sank, and the knuckles holding the teacup were faintly white. Her father is the only king with a different surname in Dazhu. Although Jinsha County is not under the jurisdiction of King Genies, how many people in Daz who don't know about it? Luo Sheng calmed down, and asked again, then what about Pingnan Palace? I don't know about the Genies Palace, and I'm afraid the Pingnan Palace doesn't know either. Unexpectedly, Hengdu laughed after being stunned. Miss, are you taking the school maidservant exam? Who doesn't know Pingnan Wangfu? The son of Pingnan Wang adopted the emperor's name 7 years ago and became a prince. The whole Pingnan Wangfu you moved to the capital, and you have met the prince. The blood on Luo Sheng's face faded completely, and he couldn't hear a word behind Hengdu. She suppressed the thunderous heartbeat, and asked tremblingly, what year is it now? 17 years of Yong'an. Hengdu replied without thinking. With a bang, the teacup in Luo Sheng's hand fell and shattered. 17 years of Yong'an she died and then woke up. 12 years have passed? What happened in the past 12 years, why is what Hengdu said so ridiculous? Hengdu was startled, and hurriedly squatted down to clean up the broken porcelain on the floor. Girl, you pricked your foot, hey, what is this? The little maid took out a white silk from the gap between the curtain and the screen, stared at it for a moment, seemed to remember something, and quickly threw the white silk in her hand. Bah, what a bad luck! Thank you for your rewards, investments and votes. End of this chapter. Chapter 4 Murderous undercurrents. The white silk that was more than 10 feet long was fluttering, and Luo Sheng stretched out his hand to hold it in the palm of his hand, staring at it thoughtfully. Hengdu's face was a bit ugly, and she said anxiously, Girl, maidservant, just burn this bad luck thing. Luo Sheng understood, is this the white silk I used for refilling? Isn't it? It was a mess at the time, and the maid didn't pay attention to it. She thought it was cleaned up, but who would have thought that it would end up here? Hengdu chirped and explained, reaching out to grab the white silk in Luo Sheng's hand. Luo Sheng didn't let go of the white silk while holding the white silk. His eyes lightly scanned the decorations in the room, and looked at the beams of the house. Hengdu was startled for a moment, and then his expression changed drastically. Girl, don't you still think about it? Luo Sheng's eyes fell on Hengdu's face, and he asked calmly, am I a person who can't think about it? No, although second young master Su is handsome, you have molested even those who are more handsome than him in the capital. Why did you commit suicide for a country boy? Luo Sheng's mouth twitched slightly. What kind of person is this Luo girl? She is really educated. Girl, please give the white silk to the maidservant. Luo Sheng ignored Hengdu's pleading, raised his hand, and the end of the white silk hung down through the beam. Hengdu's hairs stood on end, and she rushed over to hug Luo Sheng. Luo Sheng patted the little girl's hair, and ordered, go and move the stool I used for refilling before moving. Hengdu subconsciously let go of her hand, moved a small round stool over and placed it directly under the hanging white silk. After finishing all this, the little maid slapped herself. What am I doing? Luo Sheng slightly bent his lips when he saw this. She has long seen that although this little maid has many shortcomings, she does not compromise on her master's orders. This is what she needs most at the moment. Luo Sheng stepped on the round stool. Hengdu was so frightened that she lost her wits. Her voice changed as she hugged Luo Sheng's legs. Girl, do you really want to die again? A calm voice came from above. Of course not, I just want to verify a guess. Let go. Hengdu unconsciously let go of her hand, looked up at Luo Sheng who had already stood on the round stool, and asked blankly, what do you want to verify? Luo Sheng pinched the broken part of the white silk. There is a knot in this white silk, which was obviously tied when he was hanged, and the neat break was cut when Luo Sheng was rescued. Luo Sheng held the cut, and the white silk became a ring again. Hengdu stared at Luo Sheng's movements in horror, always ready to save someone. She was the one who saved the girl before, and now she is considered experienced. Luo Sheng shook the white silk, and his voice became a little colder. 3 years ago, I used this white silk to step on this round stool to throw rice. Yes. Did you see it? Luo Sheng leaned over and approached Bai Ling. Hong Do nodded cautiously, with a blank look in his eyes. She didn't see what she was going to say. Will the girl die for her to see? Luo Sheng saw the answer in the eyes of the little maid, and stopped embarrassing her, pointed to Bai Ling hanging on her chest and said, Bai Ling is in this position, if I throw it, I have to bend my knees and legs, don't you feel wronged yourself? Hong Do was stunned for a moment, and couldn't help but agree, yes, I'm so wronged. You are going to die and still use such an inconvenient posture? What's more, her girl has never been the one who wronged herself. Luo Sheng got down from the round stool and let the white silk flutter, his eyes became deeper and deeper. Hongdu, don't you understand, it's not that I want to throw money, it's because someone hurt me. Really, really? Hongdu's tongue was tied. Luo Sheng looked at Hongdu with a helpless expression, besides, I don't know if I want to die or not. Hongdu no longer had any doubts, and couldn't help but exclaim. The cool fingertips touched her lips, blocking back the exclamation. Hongdu's eyes were full of fear and anger, and she asked, Girl, who is trying to harm you? You are so daring. Luo Sheng was also thinking about this question. The favorite jewel of Governor Luo, even the old lady of the Sheng mansion couldn't put on airs of an elder, yet someone killed Miss Luo in her boudoir. The early spring wind poured in through the window lattice with coolness, blowing the still hanging white silk, and there seemed to be invisible murderous intentions surging in the house. Hongdu shivered unconsciously, became even more angry, and said murderously, Girl, we will find the person who harmed you and kill her. Luo Sheng nodded, that's exactly what I meant. She died before, so she cherishes her life even more. The person who killed Luo Sheng must be found out. Sit. Luo Sheng pointed to the round stool. Hongdu didn't dislike this round stool, which was used by her own girl to hang herself on it, so she sat down. Luo Sheng rested his chin in one hand, with a calm expression, then let's talk about my vote first. Hong Do was startled, looked at Luo Sheng's calm expression, and finally asked the growing doubts in his heart, Girl, don't you remember? Luo Sheng nodded confidently, Yes, I don't remember anything. Hongdu covered her mouth and exclaimed, How could this happen? Luo Sheng smiled disapprovingly, probably walked through the door of and accidentally drank a few mouthfuls of menpo soup. Is there really pomeng making soup by the Nahi Bridge? Luo Sheng looked at Hongdu, his eyes turned cold a little bit. Hongdu, you have to remember, whether I remember or not, I will always be your master. Hong Do's expression turned serious, and he didn't dare to ask questions anymore, about the reason why Luo Sheng cast his hand. We came to Jinsha County more than a month ago. You ran into Mr. Su and wanted to get acquainted with him, but he was rejected by the other party. After doing this a few times, you went to Mrs. Sheng and said that you don't care about Mr. Su. When did you find my grandmother? Luo Sheng interrupted Hongdu. 3 days ago. Luo Sheng's eyes flickered slightly, and then I was rejected. Hongdu was filled with righteous indignation when talking about this matter. The old lady is too unreasonable. Of course you were angry, and you cried when you came back. After you rested, the servant girl thought something was wrong and I entered the house, only to find a person hanging under the beam. Speaking of this, the little girl's face turned pale, obviously frightened. How do you find out what's wrong? Luo Sheng consciously found a breakthrough. Hongdu caressed her heart, you have the habit of taking a nap. The servant girl took advantage of that time to go to the backstreet peddler to buy some gadgets, but halfway there she found that she forgot to bring any money and came back. Originally, the servant girl didn't dare to disturb your afternoon nap. Rest, who knows that I didn't hear your snoring outside, so I came in and took a look when I felt strange. Luo Sheng looked a little stiff. In other words, this girl Luo has the habit of snoring. It's not hard to explain why, since she woke up, she found that the other maids were all guarding outside and rarely entered the house. If it were her, she probably wouldn't want anyone to get close except for her closest servant girl. Luo Sheng sorted out his thoughts, and then asked, "Did anyone come before I took a lunch break?" "Yes." Hengdu counted with her fingers, "Young master has been here, and the big cousin girl and the second cousin girl have also been here." The young master refers to Luo Sheng's younger brother Luo Chen, the first cousin is Sheng Jiayu, and the second cousin is Sheng Jiayu's concubine Sheng Jialan. "Tell me about the situation when they came, including what they said. Everyone, don't forget to vote, to climb the new book list." Grateful. End of this chapter. Chapter 5. Suspect the young master came first, and after he came, he persuaded you. Luo Sheng raised his eyebrows slightly. "Didn't you scold me?" "The red beans stagnate," Luo Sheng said expressionlessly. "You don't have to hide what you say to me from now on. What she needs is accurate information, not to be misled by embellished words." Hengdu replied yes, and said articulately, "Young master came and scolded you and left, and then the two cousin girls came. The big cousin girl said the same thing as the young master, and the second cousin girl advised you to calm down and not persuade." Luo Shengying lightly tapped the table with her fingertips. "So, the second cousin treats me well?" "Yes, among your cousins, the second cousin is the friendliest to you, unlike the first cousin who confronts you everywhere." Luo Sheng listened quietly, lost in thought. When it comes to murder, there must be a motive. The masters of the Sheng mansion have visited her one after another in the past 3 days. She doesn't talk but listens and sees more, and she has some impressions of everyone. Grandmother was helpless and disappointed with her, the eldest aunt and second aunt were disgusted but had to show a gesture of concern, the eldest uncle was a little scared, and the second uncle was not at home. Luo Sheng thought that the elders in the Sheng mansion probably didn't want to see her have an accident. Miss Luo's father is a high-ranking and powerful person, and sent his daughter who got into trouble to her grandfather's house to avoid the limelight. If something happened, the Sheng family would not be able to explain it. It is not easy for outsiders to sneak into Miss Luo's boudoir without anyone noticing. In this case, the people of the same generation in the Sheng mansion are very suspicious. The younger brother Luo Chen, who hates her but defends her, scolds her. The eldest girl Sheng Jiayu, who doesn't even bother to call her cousin, the second girl Sheng Jialan, who behaves friendly, and the 4 cousins who don't have much contact with each other. Who is it that kills Miss Luo? Luo Sheng looked at the white silk hanging from the beam again. "I have to say that this method of killing is a bit rough. The motivation may have existed for a long time, and the opportunity to prompt the other party to make a hasty move was probably just 3 days ago. That day, Miss Luo expressed her thoughts on the second young master Sud to her grandmother, and then she was murdered. There is a 9 out of 10 correlation between the two." Luo Sheng had a vague guess about the suspect, and another doubt: Miss Luo was hung on the beam after she fell asleep, and she didn't wake up and struggled during that time? She glanced slowly across the interior furnishings, and landed on the blue and white multicolored plum-patterned tea set without a tea goo at hand. The missing teacup was just smashed by her, and the broken porcelain was still on the floor. "When my brother and the others came, did they drink tea?" Hengdu didn't understand how the topic got here, but she kept in mind Luo Sheng's order to speak up when she had something to say, and recalled briefly, "Young master ran away after scolding you, but the second cousin poured a glass when the big cousin quarreled with you. Tea advises you to put out the fire. Did I drink?" "Drink it," Hengdu realized belatedly. "Girl, do you think there is something wrong with the tea?" Luo Sheng didn't say a word. Even if there is a problem with the tea, it has not been found out until now. Hengdu was still in shock. There is a problem with the tea, doesn't it mean that there is something wrong with the second cousin girl? How dare she harm the girl? The little servant girl jumped up and walked out with a murderous look. "The servant girl will settle the score with her." "Stop!" A faint voice came from behind. Hengdu turned around, puzzled. "Girl? When will her girl be the person who can swallow her anger? She often cleans up on the spot if she is upset. Don't startle the snake, besides, these are just speculations." In her opinion, this killing is full of flaws, and such speculation is enough to make her take the next step. She can't be trapped in Jinxia Sheng's house, she's going to Jenny's palace to take a look. Take a look at what happened to the home surrounded by the sound of fighting that night. Luo Sheng was anxious, but he knew that he couldn't be impatient. It was serious to solve the mess left by Miss Luo first. Furthermore, Luo Sheng caressed his wrist. The young girl's wrists are as frosty as frost, she is the best age. She died unwillingly, so she borrowed Miss Luo's body to be reborn and should bear Miss Luo's love. It is her consistent principle to repay kindness and revenge. Seeing that Luo Sheng was silent, Hong Dou became anxious. Girl, is this the way to go? Luo Sheng withdrew his thoughts, and smiled lightly. Of course it doesn't matter, you can't startle the snake, you can lure the snake out of the hole. Lead the snake out of the hole. Hong Dou blinked, his eyes sparkling. How to lead the snake out of the hole? At this time, a voice came from outside the door. Cousin girl, Sister Xuanjai from the eldest wife's room is here. Luo Sheng nodded slightly at Hongdu, who immediately shouted, tell her to come in. Luo Sheng stroked his forehead. She was signaling Hongdu to tidy up the house, for example, at least take down the white silk hanging from the beam first. A maid wearing a bean green vigilante came in, saw the gloomy white silk in front of her, screamed, and almost collapsed on the ground. Hongdu put her hands on her hips and scolded, what are you screaming for? What if you scare us girls? Shuangya looked at Luo Sheng sitting at the table, and then at the hanging white silk, her lips trembled. Who scares who? The cousin girl is really scary. What's the matter? Luo Sheng asked. Shuangya cleared up her mood, lowered her eyes and said, tonight the master and master of the house will have dinner together, and the eldest wife ordered the maid to come and tell the cousin girl. No. Shuangya bowed her knees at Luo Sheng, and when she got back, she vividly described the scene she saw when she entered Luo Sheng's room. A white silk was hanging in front of the maidservant's eyes, so frightened that the maidservant's heart almost jumped out. The eldest wife's face was a little ugly. What's going on here? Fortunately, this cousin girl will not come to tonight's family banquet, so as not to cause trouble to the children. Every 5 days, all the houses in the Sheng mansion will gather for a family banquet. Luo Sheng's visitors are guests. Although this kind of family banquet has only been visited once to save face, the eldest wife in charge of the housekeeper will send someone to invite each time. The eldest wife's hanging heart was slightly relaxed, and she told Xuanjai, go and tell the 2 young masters to stay away from the cousin girl in the future. Take precautions. Never thought that the old lady would have the plan to promise her cousin girl to her sons. If she knew it would be like this, the matter of going to Sue's house to talk today might as well have come to fruition. Soon the sun was setting, and Luo Sheng rushed to Funing Hall with Hongdu. Jinsha County is located in the south. Although it is early spring, Shenfu is full of lush vegetation and spring flowers are blooming. Luo Sheng walked through flowers and willows all the way, and met 4 men hidden. She stood still, her eyes swept over the faces of the 4 people. The one who is tall and straight like a green pine is the eldest cousin, the one with peach eyes and holding a folding fan is the second cousin, the one with thick eyebrows and big eyes is the third cousin, and the childish 4th cousin is the one. These 4 people went to see her together once after she woke up. Although they came and went in a hurry like a business trip, she remembered it. After waking up, the world was turned upside down, and she had to use her heart to remember everything she heard and saw. Luo Sheng bowed slightly, and saluted the 4 of them as peers. The 4 of them stood there dumbfounded the moment they saw Luo Sheng, and woke up like a dream when they saw her salute. The 3 cousins who came back to their senses hurriedly saluted Luo Sheng and said in unison, I have something urgent to go out, so I won't go with my cousin. After the words fell, the 3 of them ran away. Sheng Sanlang didn't forget to grab the younger brother who didn't react. Hong Dou opened his mouth wide, what the are you guys doing? Luo Sheng didn't take it seriously, don't worry about it, let's go. People who would run away after seeing her probably don't have the courage to kill people, not to mention that Miss Luo didn't show any interest in messing with her cousin, so the other party couldn't do it. The 4 people who ran outside the gate in one breath were panting, and the shock had just come to an end. 3 brothers, there's no need to be so scared, right? Shang Shiro looked puzzled. Peach-Ade Sheng Erlang hit Shang Shiro's head with a gold-painted folding fan. What do idiots know? If you are entangled with cousin Luo, you will be in darkness. End of this chapter. Chapter 6 Paralysis. The orange trees in Funing Hall are covered with sunset glow, and the green leaves are dyed a touch of red. The red lanterns hanging under the eaves have been lit up, covering the excitement in the courtyard. Luo Sheng's arrival stunned the maid guarding the gate, and then she shouted, "My cousin is here." Luo Sheng stepped into the door, and could clearly feel the silence in the room. The family banquet was held in the flower hall. At this time, except for the cousins who were scared away by Luo Sheng, everyone was already there. In this slightly awkward atmosphere, Luo Sheng saluted the old lady Sheng who was sitting in the upper seat. "Sheng is late." Old lady Sheng's eyes flashed with surprise, but she said with a smile at the corner of her mouth, "Sheng er, sit down quickly." The eldest wife and the second wife looked at each other, and their hearts sank. My cousin never attended family dinners before, why did she suddenly come today? Shouldn't it really be the idea of the sons? Quietly swept the empty seats, the eldest wife and the second wife secretly rejoiced. Fortunately, the sons did not show up for some reason, and escaped unharmed. Old lady Sheng asked suddenly, "Why haven't Dallin and the others arrived yet?" The eldest wife shook the corners of her mouth, pretending to be dissatisfied and said, "Who knows where they went wild? Don't be angry, wait for Dallin and the others to come back and talk to my daughter-in-law. It's getting worse and worse." Mrs. Sheng held up her chopsticks. Seeing Mrs. Sheng move her chopsticks, the others followed suit. Because it was a family banquet, they didn't pay much attention to the rules of eating without speaking, and the atmosphere was quite warm. Luo Sheng has a special status. Mrs. Sheng and her elders asked a few more questions to show their concern. It can be seen that she eats elegantly, but somehow felt that such behavior was a bit disgusting, so she stopped talking. Luo Sheng put down his chopsticks not long after eating, and looked at everyone coldly with the clear tea served by the maid. Although old lady Sheng is getting old, she has a good appetite. At this time, she is eating smoked duck breast with chopsticks. Uncle Sheng is in his prime, dressed as a scribe, drinks more than chopsticks, and his face is already flushed. Sitting next to the eldest wife is the eldest girl Sheng Jiao. The murderous look Luo Sheng received as soon as she entered was contributed by this cousin. Beside Sheng Jiao sat a girl with willow eyebrows and almond eyes, the second girl, Sheng Jialan. Luo Sheng looked at Sheng Jialan on purpose. Sheng Jialan kept her eyes down while eating, looking gentle and demure. Cousin girl doesn't like it. Luo Sheng turned his eyes and met the smiling face of the eldest lady. The cousin girl can tell what she likes to eat, and then the eldest aunt will tell the kitchen to make it. The eldest wife smiled on her face, but she was really annoyed in her heart. Not only annoying, but also panicked. This cousin girl is not going to make trouble again, is she? The eldest lady changed her mind when she saw Luo Sheng put the teacup on the table. The blue and white porcelain teacup made a sound when it touched the mahogany tabletop. The sound was very slight, but everyone looked over with a boost of energy. Finally came, and said how could Luo Sheng be a person who eats quietly. Luo Chen's delicate eyebrows were tightened, and he clenched his chopsticks tightly. Facing everyone's eyes, Luo Sheng showed no emotion on his face, but said indifferently, "There is something I want to explain to my grandmother." "What does Sheng want to say?" Mrs. Sheng asked with all her energy. "I didn't intend to hang myself." There was a soft sound, and it was the second girl, Sheng Jialan, who dropped a silver chopstick from her hand. This movement was louder than Luo Sheng's just now, but it was quickly covered by the sneer of the eldest girl Sheng Jiao. Hehe, everyone knows that my cousin really wants to hang herself. This was the first time Luo Sheng heard Sheng Jiahu call her cousin after waking up, but it was full of sarcasm. Jiahu, don't talk nonsense. The eldest wife shouted at her daughter, but her eyes were calm. Of course she wouldn't be angry with her daughter. Although her daughter's words were harsh, but this cousin girl was too pretentious. Make heaven and earth disturb the entire Sheng family. Luo Sheng has a father that the Sheng family can't afford to offend. It's hard for them as elders to say anything, and a few disputes between peers will not cause trouble to the Sheng family. If this is her daughter, the eldest wife is so scared that she can't breathe. She can't raise such a daughter. My mother-in-law used to always talk about my sister-in-law being gentle and courteous. Don't you feel shabby seeing such a granddaughter? She thought about going to see Luo Sheng, and couldn't help being startled. The girl's back is straight, her brows and eyes are calm, which is quite different from the impression she gave in the past. Luo Sheng didn't even give Sheng Jiahu a look, and explained seriously, I mean I didn't vote. She kept looking at Sheng Jialan from the corner of her eye, and saw that the other person's face was pale, the corners of his lips were tight, and he lost the demure look just now. Old lady Sheng's expression became serious, she stared at Luo Sheng and asked in a deep voice, Sheng what do you mean by that? Listening to granddaughter, could it be that someone harmed her? Luo Chen's expression also changed. It's one thing for Luo Sheng to kill her, but it's another thing for someone to kill her. Cousin girl, there are some things that are not easy to say casually. The eldest wife persuaded her beating heart. Luo Sheng's lips curved. Her eyes are bright, and her skin is snow white, but there is no smile on her face, and she is as deserted as a beautiful woman. This inexplicable indifference made people pay more attention to what she was going to say next. Luo Sheng said, I didn't think about throwing money, but that happened. After thinking about it, maybe I made a mistake with night tours, and I did something ridiculous in a day's night tour. Everyone was taken aback. Luo Sheng nodded slightly, I didn't want to bring up the hidden illness at first, but what happened 3 days ago made the elders worry, so I'd like to make it clear today. The stagnant atmosphere suddenly flowed with Luo Sheng's explanation. Old lady Sheng breathed a sigh of relief, and asked with concern, is the illness serious? Has your father invited you to a doctor? Please. I used to have it when I was young, but I never had it when I was older. Maybe it happened because I was not used to it when I changed places. Then invite a doctor to come and have a look tomorrow. Luo Sheng shook his head and refused, don't bother, Hengdu used to make medicine for me, I still remember the prescription. Old lady Sheng wanted to persuade her again, but Luo Sheng said directly, I don't want more people to know about my hidden disease. Old lady Sheng just gave up. Luo Sheng glanced out of the corner of his eye, and the second girl Sheng Jialan's face had regained its color. She bent her lips slightly and took a sip of tea. The family banquet is over, and a waning moon is already hanging in the sky, sprinkled with thin moon frost. Luo Sheng didn't let Hengdu carry the lamp, and walked calmly on the blue stone road. Luo Chen followed quickly, blocking her way. Under the moonlight, the young man looked deep and inquiring, are you really nocturnal? Luo Sheng nodded. Why do you want to hang yourself in your dream? Luo Sheng felt that the young man's question was a bit sharp, and after thinking about it, he said, probably because he didn't dare to try it when he was sober. Unreasonable. The boy turned pale with anger at this answer, and walked away. Luo Sheng stood on the side of the road and watched the thin boy go away, feeling nothing in his heart. She will be leaving here soon, and she doesn't have the energy to build a good relationship with others. The roadside is surrounded by verdant flowers and trees, shadows casting shadows on the girl's clothes. Suddenly, a man's voice came faintly. End of this chapter. Chapter 7 Apricot Blossom Fertilizer. Luo Sheng was mostly covered by flowers and trees, standing in the dark to hear the reputation. Are the four of Sheng Dalan. Luo Sheng also smelled a faint smell of alcohol. I met 4 people by chance before, and the 4 people were too scared to eat at home. It seems that they went out for a while. Sheng Sanlang staggered, and was walking in the direction of Luo Sheng with the support of his brothers. Sheng Erlang's tone of hatred for iron and steel sounded, "Third brother, why are you saddened by the death of a woman who doesn't have you in her heart?" Sheng Saburo raised his head slightly, revealing red eyes under the moonlight. "Who is feeling sad? Second brother, don't talk nonsense." "Nonsense." Sheng Erlang tapped Sheng Sanlang's shoulder with a folding fan, and said in a bad mood, "Then who has drunk this virtue? Isn't it just drinking to drown your sorrows?" Besides, Sheng Dalan persuaded, "Second brother, third brother feels uncomfortable, so please don't say a few words." Sheng Erlang sneered, "I just can't see it. That Jian girl committed suicide because Su Yao couldn't get married. What is the third brother making trouble like this? To commit suicide?" Luo Sheng's eyes flickered slightly. Her eyes are like a pool of lake water, the shadows of flowers, branches and trees are reflected in it, with bright and dark ripples. Sheng Sanlang's face was flushed red, he didn't know whether he drank too much or he was ashamed. He shouted angrily, "Who is making trouble? Today's wine is strong enough, can I have a few more sips?" Sheng Shiro yanked Sheng Saburo's sleeve, "Third brother, don't talk." Sheng Saburo rubbed the top of his younger brother's head with his big hand like a palm fan, "Go ahead, you kids still want to talk. It's fine for the elder brother to talk too much, but the younger brother still wants to preach to him?" Sheng Shiro blushed and stammered anxiously, "No, cousin is there." The other 3 people stopped together, and when they saw Luo Sheng standing beside the flowers and trees in front of them, their expressions suddenly became colorful. Luo Sheng looked calm and nodded at the 4 of them, greeted them, and walked forward with Hengdu without squinting. The wind was strong at night, and Luo Hua was swept away by the wind, just like the 4 people's desolate mood at the moment. Sheng Sanlang wiped his face, and asked blankly, "Cousin Luo heard what we said?" Sheng Erlang chuckled, "It's hard to say whether you heard other people's words. Third brother, you had such a loud voice just now, you must have been heard." Saburo Sheng. Luo Sheng returned to the room, washed and changed into a snow-white jacket and leaned on the couch. Hengdu moved to the little house, sat down next to the master, and asked puzzledly, "Miss, why do you say you have a hidden disease of night travel?" Luo Sheng looked at the shadow cast by Basho on the green screen window, and calmly said, "Let the other party feel safe, so that the snake can be lured out of the hole." The little servant girl shook her head, "My servant doesn't understand." Luo Sheng looked at the little maid with a confused face, and smiled rarely, "You don't need to understand, just do as I tell you." She likes this unintelligent little maid. She has no memory of Miss Luo at all. Fortunately, she came to Sheng Mansion not long ago, so she doesn't have to worry about showing her feet in front of these people. If Miss Luo's personal servant girl is too clever, then she will be given a problem. Killing people and silence them is a bit unbearable after all. Go and call those 2 little maids. Hengdu replied yes, and after a while, 2 little maids came in. The 2 little maids are both 13 or 14 years old. They are only responsible for some chores on weekdays, and they don't come into the back room when they are idle. "Cousin girl." The 2 little maids were photographed by Luo Sheng's lust, and saluted tremblingly. Luo Sheng nodded slightly, and said to Hengdu, "Take 4 taels of silver, 2 taels per person." Hengdu has seen her own girls spend a lot of money, so she took the money and threw it into the arms of the 2 little maids very readily. The 2 little maids were so shocked that they fell to their knees, and asked in unison, "Biao, what is the order of Miss Biao? Could it be that the cousin girls are short of manpower? Let them go to the street to grab some sun? Although money is good, they can't do this kind of thing." Luo Sheng confessed lightly, "Tomorrow you all go to the street." One of the little maids shook her body and kowtowed, "My cousin, you can't do this kind of thing like a maidservant." Luo Sheng paused. Hengdu jumped up and began to scold, "Hey, what is the dream of the little hooves? It's your turn to rob people. With her Hengdu here, how could the girl entrust such errands to others? This is an insult to her number one servant girl and thug. The eyes of the two servant girls straightened. Is it because they have little knowledge? When did it become a good job to go to the streets to a beautiful man? Luo Sheng's tone was calm, and he was not at all disturbed by the reactions of the three servant girls. He continued to explain, tomorrow, go to the street and ask to see if there is a girl surnamed Jian who committed suicide. The more details the better. If you think it's inconvenient to inquire by yourself, so you can ask your parents, brothers, and friends to do it for you. The 2 taels of silver are for running errands, and whoever inquires about it tomorrow will be rewarded with another 2 taels of silver. The 2 servant girls were greatly relieved when they heard that they were just inquiring about the news, and they said together, "Don't worry, cousin, the servant girl will go and inquire about it tomorrow morning." After speaking, the 2 looked at each other, looking at each other with a hint of vigilance. Biao girl can say, whoever inquires more information tomorrow will have a reward of 2 taels, but the other party can't get it. 2 little maids were eager to try and walked out of the room. Hengdu hurriedly asked, "Girl, why did you ask them to inquire about that?" "Curiosity." Luo Sheng lay down on his side, pulled over the brocade quilt and covered it up. The bedding exudes a familiar yet unfamiliar fragrance, and it is a new day in the blink of an eye. Luo Sheng opened his eyes early. The plantains shook outside the green screen window, and the crisp calls of kingfishers floated in. Hengdu was sleeping on the ground level of the bamboo bed, and she was still sleeping soundly. Luo Sheng coughed lightly, and shouted, "Red beans!" Obviously the voice was not loud, but Hengdu got up suddenly, rubbed his eyes and asked in bewilderment, "Girl, why did you wake up so early?" Luo Sheng curled the corners of his lips slightly, "It's getting late, it's time to go pay my respects to my grandmother." Hengdu suddenly lost sleepiness, and said in disbelief, "You never went to pay your respects before." That is, when she was in the capital, the girl would sleep until midnight before getting up. After eating and drinking, she would take her and a few servant girls to wander the streets. "What is hello?" Luo Sheng glanced at Hengdu, and said indifferently, "I haven't visited Ghost Gate before, but it's different now." Seeing this, Hengdu felt awe-inspiring, but couldn't explain why, so she hurriedly helped Luo Sheng wash and dress. The 2 master and servant walked out of the courtyard and walked slowly towards Funing Hall. Shenfu is a typical Jiangnan scenery, graceful and elegant, with clusters of flowers everywhere. Hengdu took a breath of fresh air, and said with a smile, "I didn't expect that Shenfu is small, but the garden in the morning looks pretty good." Luo Sheng walked forward slowly without commenting. Hengdu stopped suddenly, "Girl, please wait a moment." Luo Sheng stopped, and saw the little maid running to an apricot tree with her skirt in her hand, tiptoed off a bunch of apricot blossoms and came back. "Girl, the apricot blossoms are blooming well. May I pick a few for you to put in your hair?" Luo Sheng's gaze fell from the little girl's flushed face to the blossoming flower, and she nodded slightly, "Okay." Hengdu pinned a circle of apricot flowers around Luo Sheng's bun, and suddenly said in a low voice, "Girl, 2 cousins are here." End of this chapter. Chapter 8. Leading the snake out of the hole. The eldest girl, Sheng Jiao, and the second girl, Sheng Jialan, were walking towards Luo Sheng along a blue stone path. The 2 young girls are about the same age, and their spring clothes are colorful, and they will undoubtedly add a beautiful scenery to the garden. When the 2 saw Luo Sheng, they stopped in unison. Sheng Jiao frowned, staring at Luo Sheng warily. Sheng Jialan bowed her knees to Luo Sheng Ying, "Good morning, cousin." Luo Sheng returned the salute and walked forward. Sheng Jiao couldn't help shouting, "Where are you going?" Luo Sheng looked back at her, and said lightly, "Naturally, I'm going to pay my respects to my grandmother at this time." "Greetings to my grandmother." Sheng Jiao's eyes became more alert, she lowered her voice and asked, "Luo Sheng, what are you planning?" Sheng Jialan gently tugged on Sheng Jie's sleeve. Elder sister, talk to your cousin. Luo Sheng looked at Sheng Jiu, then at Sheng Jialan, and suddenly smiled. My cousin still understands me. After saying that, she passed the two sisters and walked forward quickly. Hengdu hurriedly followed, thinking about Sheng Jiu's words. She was a little annoyed, and turned around to make a face at Sheng Jiu. Sheng Jiu was so angry that she twisted her handkerchief and said angrily, "What does she mean?" Sheng Jialan persuaded Sheng Jiu, thinking of what Luo Sheng said to Sheng Jiu just now. Her eyes flickered with anxiety. Second sister, did you hear that? She said that I still understand her. Does this mean to cause trouble? Sheng Jialan frowned lightly. My cousin is probably just talking out of anger. What are you talking about? She can't stand it if she doesn't get into trouble for a day. No, I want to remind my grandmother, don't be fooled by her current appearance. Sheng Jiu pulled Sheng Jialan and hurried to chase after her. Luo Sheng's arrival undoubtedly surprised Mrs. Sheng. Shenger is not in good health yet, why did you come here? Old Lady Sheng said, peeking out of the window out of the corner of her eye. Outside the window, the sun is clear, and the warm wind is clear and shallow. The sun didn't come out from the west. Old Lady Sheng became more and more surprised, and of course it was hard to show it on her face. After all, she is the granddaughter of a direct relative, so she can't throw it away no matter how disgusted she is. Luo Sheng smiled slightly, I'm much better now, it's time to pay my respects to my grandmother. Old Lady Sheng's lips moved, she really wanted to say hello, she felt more at ease, but the words changed, Shenger has a heart. Sheng Jiu sneered. Old Lady Sheng made a sharp glance, and Sheng Jiu shut her mouth tightly. When Luo Sheng left, old Madame Sheng's face darkened. Jiu, don't be cold-hearted to your cousin, is there any rule? Although the eldest granddaughter has a lively temperament, she has never had a lot of etiquette, but since her granddaughter came, she has repeatedly lost her composure. Sheng Jiu bit her lip aggrievedly, grandmother, it's not that my granddaughter has no rules, she really doesn't show respect to Luo Sheng. Could it be that because of uncle's high position and authority, the granddaughter is required to be a little fussy to such an incomprehensible cousin? Old Lady Sheng was immediately stopped by the question. The Sheng family is the same as the Sui family, they are farming and studying heirs, and there is a bit of arrogance in their bones. It's not good for them as elders to argue with an ignorant little girl, but they also can't see their own girl bowing to Luo Sheng because of her power. Grandmother, we bumped into Luo Sheng on the way to Funing Hall, you don't even know what she said. Sheng Jiu talked about what happened on the road, and shook the old lady Sheng's arm. Grandmother, listen, she is obviously full of bad water and is going to make trouble. You think she will be safe after crying, making trouble, and hanging herself? If it is divided, then it is wrong. Old Lady Sheng's eyelids twitched, and she asked dryly, really? She can't bear her granddaughter to toss about her old bones. Sheng Jiu nodded sharply, and pushed Sheng Jialan, second sister, didn't you hear that too? Seeing old lady Sheng looking over, Sheng Jialan nodded slightly. The old lady Sheng sighed for a long time, looked at the two flower-like granddaughters and said helplessly, it doesn't matter what your cousin is, as long as you two behave well, go back. Sheng Jiu and Sheng Jialan left Funing Hall and walked towards their residence. Sister, do you really think my cousin is going to make trouble? I don't think so, but she definitely will. Sheng Jiu sneered, and suddenly pulled Sheng Jialan aside behind the flowers and trees, and said in a low voice, Luo Sheng is by the lake. There is a small artificial lake in Shenfu Garden. Apricots and willows are planted by the lake. The lake is clear and clear, which is a good place to enjoy the scenery. She doesn't even look down on every plant and tree in our Shenfu, why is she so busy enjoying the scenery by the lake? Sheng Jiu felt strange, and poked her head to look. Luo Sheng stood facing the lake, sometimes turning his head to talk to Hengdu. Shang Jialan tugged Shang Jia's sleeve lightly. Sister, let's go, this is not good. What's wrong? I'll go and listen to what they say. Shang Jia broke away from Shang Jialan, and leaned over under the cover of flowers and trees. Shang Jialan's outstretched hands were empty, and she slowly closed her palms and followed. The dialogue between the master and the servant was clearly heard by the two sisters. Girl, are you really not interested in second master Su? Hearing Hengdu mention Su Yao, both Shang Jiao and Shang Jialan's expressions tightened and their ears pricked up. A chuckle came, with a bit of carelessness, but it was very nice. Who said that? Hengdu's eyes widened, full of confusion. Then why did you go to Su's house to stop the marriage? Luo Sheng whipped the lake with a willow branch casually, and squinted at the little maid. Hengdu, are you stupid living here? Second young master Su is handsome, but if I marry him, if I meet him, what about the more handsome man? Hengdu suddenly realized, young lady is right, don't let second young master Su delay you. Luo Sheng raised his fair chin slightly, looking arrogant and reckless. That's right. Hengdu blinked and hesitated, but in Jinsha, I haven't heard of a man who is better than second young master Su. Luo Sheng smiled, so I didn't intend to let him go. After I get better, you can quietly knock Su unconscious, and see how he will resist people thousands of miles away. Shang Jia raised her brows when she heard this, and was about to rush out to find Luo Sheng's theory, but Shang Jialan grabbed her wrist with one hand and covered her mouth with the other. Shang Jia looked at Shang Jialan and blinked in confusion. Shang Jialan shook her head slightly, lowered her voice and said, eldest sister, don't be impulsive. Once my cousin becomes angry, she might break the pot and go to trouble with second young master Su immediately. The two sisters were emotionally agitated here, but Luo Sheng threw the willow branch into the lake, and said calmly, let's go. It seems that to her, harming second young master Su is like abandoning this willow branch, which is not worth mentioning. She is so shameless. Shang Jia was so angry that she kicked Xingshu when Luo Sheng's master and servant left. Apricot blossoms are falling like snow. Across the apricot blossom rain, Shang Jialan's eyes kept chasing the fading back figure, and her eyes gradually turned cold. End of this chapter. Chapter 9. Coincidence. After Shang Jiao and Shang Jialan left, the flowers and leaves trembled, and a man jumped up from the flowers. Cousin Luo is really scary. Sheng Sanlang, who had heard Luo Sheng's conversation between master and servant, wiped his face, feeling scared for a while. He was in a bad mood. He drank a pot of stuffy wine early in the morning and fell into a daze among the flowers. Afterwards, he heard a faint sound coming from the lake. Originally, he wanted to say hello out of politeness. Sheng Sanlang gave a jolt and shook his head, brushed off the flowers and leaves on his body, and walked away quickly. After Luo Sheng returned to the room, Hengdu asked a little late, girl, will we really lure snakes out of their holes by saying that? Luo Sheng looked at Basho out of the window with a calm expression, you have to try it before you talk. She can't guarantee that others will act according to her wishes, but since the other party is a poisonous snake that has bitten people, it is very likely that they will strike again when they find an opportunity. Hengdu tilted her head and looked at Luo Sheng, very puzzled, why is it so troublesome, girls wouldn't be like this before. Luo Sheng withdrew his eyes and looked at Hengdu, and smiled with bent lips, oh, what was I like before? She was born bright, and her smile should have been bright and brilliant, but at this moment, her eyes were deep and deep, and her smile couldn't reach her eyes, which made her whole person feel cold. Hengdu couldn't help but feel distressed when he looked at it. Thinking about how reckless their girls were before, they became more careful after drinking menpo soup after walking through the gate of hell. Hengdu decided to encourage her own girl, waved her hand and said, I didn't even think about it before, I think the second cousin girl is not a good one, so just strip her naked and beat her and throw her on the street. Luo Sheng's eyes flickered slightly, have I done this before? Almost. Hengdu said vaguely. Tell me specifically. Hengdu bit her lip, the servant girl is afraid of making the girl angry by mentioning it. It was that time, there was a little hoof in the mansion who winked at Mr. Si. Luo Sheng stopped Hong Do's words, "Who is Mr. Si?" Hong Do put his forehead on his forehead, and said with a distressed face, "The girl even forgot about Mr. Si. Mr. Si is the face you snatched back when you went shopping." As calm as Luo Sheng, his expression twisted at this moment. "Face first? Listen to this Miss Luo's past, why does she think that her princess is in vain? Forget it, let's not talk about this, go and see if those two little maids have come back from inquiring about the news." Luo Sheng felt that he needed to take a break. Red Do placed a plate of candied fruit in front of Luo Sheng, and said with a smile, "Young lady will feel better after eating some candied fruit. Let me take a look." The little maid turned and went out, leaving Luo Sheng in a daze for a while, then picked up a candied fruit and put it in her mouth. Sweet and sour plums are not palatable to Luo Sheng. She stared at the plum on her fingertips and her thoughts drifted further. She once carved green plums into flower shapes and made candied fruit to make her mother happy. Now she is trapped in Jinsha as Miss Luo, and she doesn't know what happened to her parents and relatives. After side-talking Hengdu, Luo Sheng didn't dare to mention Jenny's palace to others. From Hengdu's ignorance of the Jenny's palace, and the officers and soldiers she saw surrounding the palace that night, she already had guesses about the fate of her family. But she is not reconciled, she still wants to take a look. Luo Sheng's fingertips felt cold, and the plums fell back into the plate. Hengdu walked in hurriedly, followed by two little maids. The two little maids hurriedly greeted Luo Sheng. Compared with yesterday's panic, today they were a little more excited. "Money to open the way, most of the time it works. Tell me." Luo Sheng cut to the chase. A little servant girl hurriedly said, "Biao girl, I went to inquire about it. Miss Jian is the daughter of Jian Juren. Jian Juren betrothed her to his student last year. Who knew that Miss Jian fell in love with Mr. Su, and she was unwilling to live or die. Married in the past, seeing that she was about to leave the court and could not disobey her parents' orders, she committed suicide by throwing herself. Another little maid was afraid that her credit would be snatched away by her companions, so she interjected, 'The servant girl entrusted my elder brother to inquire about it.'" Apart from the things that Qinghong said that outsiders know, the elder maid-servant also inquired about one thing. Luo Sheng looked at the little maid who spoke, with a calm expression. The little servant girl didn't dare to be foolish, and hurriedly said, "The elder maid-servant heard about it from the coachman of Jian's family, saying that Miss Jian met second young master Su by chance on the road, and she was so infatuated that she chased second young master Su all the way to the outside of Su's residence. Leave." Speaking of this, the little maid covered her mouth and smiled. Although Jinsha has a lot of young ladies who secretly fall in love with Mr. Su, it is still rare for them to dare to chase after people as blatantly as this Miss Jian. The little maid on the side gave her a yank. "Han Kui." The maid named Han Kui suddenly realized, what the cousin girl in front of me did is even more jaw-dropping than Miss Jian. Oops, how could I forget this in a hurry? The little servant girl turned pale with fright, and looked at Luo Sheng tremblingly. Luo Sheng still looked calm, and ordered Hengdu, "Take 2 taels of silver and give it to Han Kui." Hengdu naturally complied. Han Kui's complexion improved after receiving the silver award. Qinghong stared enviously at the silver key in Han Kui's hand. 2 taels of silver, worth her money for several months. Take another 1 or 2 and give it to Qinghong. After Luo Sheng gave the order, he signaled the 2 little maids to step back. The 2 little maids who received the silver reward went out and sat in the veranda. You looked at me and I looked at you, and they were all in disbelief. Han Kui squeezed the silver clasp, and said in disbelief, "It's so simple to get 4 taels of silver. 2 taels yesterday, and 2 taels today, add up to more than her half-year monthly payment. This is not to hand over the private money of parents." Qinghong looked back at the door with her chin in her hands, and murmured, "Why do I think cousin is not so bad?" Han Kui spat, "Just give me the money." Qing Hong carefully put away the silver box, rolled her eyes. It's not good for the master who gave you the money, why should you beat and scold your master? Besides, it's not about the money. Exactly why she felt this way, she couldn't tell. In the house, Hong Do didn't feel sorry for the money she gave out, but sighed, the girl is more careful than before. Luo Sheng frowned. Randomly rewarding the maid with 7 or 8 taels of silver is called careful planning. Hong Do hurriedly said in relief, Miss, have you forgotten that we don't have much on hand, except money? When the governor sent the girl away, he gave a lot of banknotes. It's a pity that all the friends who went shopping with the girl in the past were not allowed to follow except her. Thinking of Cower, another big maid who was nearly blind from crying before leaving, Hong Du felt lucky again. Luo Sheng was not interested in how much money Miss Luo had, so he waved his hand to signal Hong Du to back down. The sound of the door closing softly came, and it was very clear in the alone room. Luo Sheng sat at the square table, thoughtful. Miss Luo threw herself in a bag because of Second Master Su, and Miss Jian also committed suicide because of Second Master Su. Such a coincidence is really horrifying. She pursed her lips slightly, and dipped her tea in the table to write 2 words with her fingers. Those 2 words are exactly Su Yao. New books are not easy, dear friends, don't forget to vote. End of this chapter. Chapter 10 Variables. The people in Chenfu discovered that the cousin girl had changed. In the past, the cousin girl slept until the sun was high, and then took the big maid Hong Du to wander the streets, but now she can't be shaken and comes to Funing Hall to pay her respects to the old lady. Once early, once late, every time never fails. Since the day when the cousin changed, Mrs. Sheng hasn't seen a few grandchildren during the time of paying her respects. The eldest wife and the second wife explained to the old lady Sheng with a dry smile in private, the children have a lot of homework recently. Mrs. Sheng didn't believe a word about this. What homework is tight? It is obvious that since she announced that she would choose one of the 4 grandchildren for her granddaughter, the 2 daughters-in-law were frightened. What can this little guts accomplish? Old lady Sheng had despised her daughters-in-law in her heart, and looked at the granddaughter who came to pay her respects every day before her, and she looked more amiable. It's better to come to pay her respects than to run to the street and back a grandson-in-law for her. People, contentment and happiness. The contented old lady Sheng was so happy that she ordered her maid to fetch a pair of bracelets for Luo Sheng. Luo Sheng put away the bracelet and blessed himself, "Thank you grandma for the reward." Old lady Sheng breathed a sigh of relief. The granddaughter grew up in the brocade pile, but fortunately she didn't express her disgust in public, otherwise where would she put her old face? Old lady Sheng's tone became softer unconsciously, "Go back and rest." After speaking, she glanced at the 2 granddaughters, and the old lady's tone became more casual, "You guys go down too. There is no need to coax the ones raised at home, whoever dares to come and beat them up." Sheng Jiayu stomped her feet angrily as soon as she came out of Funing Hall, "Grandmother is really eccentric. We haven't seen any compliments for more than 10 years, but Luo Sheng doesn't go to the streets to hang out. That's rare." Sheng Jialan gently pulled Sheng Jiayu's sleeve, and whispered to persuade, "Sister, don't be angry, Grandma is happy to see that her cousin has changed." "Correct." Sheng Jiayu sneered, "Second sister, have you forgotten what we heard that day by the lake? Luo Sheng just can't change and eat shit. Just wait and see, she might attack second young master Su one day." Sheng Jialan's eyes were gloomy, and she clenched her hands tightly in her wide sleeves, "Sister, don't talk about it. If it spreads to Grandma's ears, Grandma will be upset. Let's go back to the house." Sheng Jiayu nodded with a dark face. The 2 sisters passed by the lake and looked there subconsciously, and they caught a glimpse of a graceful figure. Sheng Jiayu curled her lips and sneered, "Why are you pretending to be in front of the water to see the flowers? I don't know how much bad water is simmering in my stomach. Sister, let's go." Sheng Jialan pulled Sheng Jiayu, but before leaving, she glanced back quietly. The girl was sitting by the lake, resting her chin on the lake in a daze. There is no shadow of the maid Hengdu around her, only two white geese swimming around leisurely. Shang Jialan's eyes flickered slightly. Alone, the opportunity she's been waiting for may have arrived. What's the second sister's plan today? Shang Jialan's expression returned to normal. She softly smiled and said, I caught a cold yesterday, but now my head is still hurting. I want to go back to my room and sleep. I still want to ask my second sister to go to Yurongtang together. Shang Jia was a little disappointed, and quickly laughed, then let's go when the second sister gets better tomorrow. Good. The two sisters separated beside a clump of rhododendrons and went back to Xiaol respectively. Soon after, Shang Jialan, who originally said she was going to go back to sleep, quietly came down another staircase. Her figure was hidden among the lush trees in the garden, and she returned to the lake after a while. Standing behind the flowers and trees by the lake, Shang Jialan looked at the lonely girl and couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. Luo Sheng is still alone. She has noticed for a long time that Luo Sheng always sits by the lake for a while when he comes out of Funing Hall these days. The time may be long or short, sometimes the master and servant chat casually, and sometimes order the maid named Hengdu to fetch the fruit plate, leaving a field of melon seed shells by the lake before leaving. Once she even saw Luo Sheng waiting there, and the little maid named Hengdu bounced around and brought a pack of smoked chicken. There was no smoked chicken in the kitchen that day, so it was obvious that it was bought from outside. Today Hengdu probably slipped out to go shopping again. Shang Jialan stared at Luo Sheng's back with a gloomy and unpredictable expression. She started again, she hesitated too much. Suddenly, Shang Jialan seemed to have noticed something, she couldn't help but took a step forward, and opened her eyes to look carefully. The girl sitting by the lake rests her chin on her hand, her head is like a chicken pecking at rice bit by bit. Chunyang sprinkled on her body, outlining the corners of her hair and skirt, forming a quiet and soft picture. Luo Sheng was actually dozing off. Shang Jialan felt her heartbeat speed up suddenly, and quickly bit her lip hard to make up her mind. I can no longer hesitate, I am afraid that I will not have such a good opportunity if I miss today. Behind the flowers and trees, the girl has a slender figure, but the sullen expression on her face makes her look weak. Shang Jialan's eyes were gloomy, and she walked towards the lake with the corner of her skirt in her hand. It's getting closer, but Luo Sheng is still dozing off, unaware. Shang Jialan's footsteps were so light that she almost made no sound. Standing behind Luo Sheng, she curled her lips, and her thunderous heartbeat actually calmed down. Luo Sheng is an idiot, she really doesn't have to hesitate for so long. Shang Jialan held out her hand. A 14-year-old girl with fair and soft hands, but at this moment she is swimming towards people like a pair of poisonous snakes. The pair of white geese on the lake suddenly called. Shang Jialan panicked and pushed Luo Sheng's back hard. With a loud splash, the unsuspecting Luo Sheng was pushed into the lake. The corners of Shang Jialan's lips curled up, and a smile spread. Sure enough, it was as simple as that time and succeeded, but it's a pity that the last time was not lucky. A scream froze the smile on Shang Jialan's lips. What are you doing? Come on, the second cousin pushed our girl into the lake. The high-pitched scream broke through the sky, frightening two white geese to fly ashore, and the food box in Hengdu's hand fell to the ground, and ran over. Shang Jialan turned around stiffly, as if seeing a ghost. Red beans running to the lake kicked Shang Jialan into the lake. At the same time, a figure jumped into the lake, struggling to swim towards the ups and downs of Luo Sheng. Just going to grab the red beans from my girl and blink. Oh, it's the young master. This is terrible, is she going to help the girl, or save the young man? The little maid hesitated for a moment, let go of her throat and shouted, "Help, help!" People who heard the movement came one after another, and the garden quickly became chaotic. In the water, Luo Chen, who grabbed Luo Sheng's wrist, sipped and warned, "Don't struggle." Luo Sheng opened his eyes, Looking at the pale-faced young man, there was finally a hint of surprise in his eyes. Luo Chen actually jumped into the lake to save this sister? This is really the only variable in her plan. Luo Sheng sighed softly in his heart, with this child's small body going into the water to save people, I'm afraid there will be trouble. She just thought about it, and saw the boy's face pale and sinking, but those hands pushed her up hard. Luo Sheng let out an inaudible sigh, put one arm around Luo Chen, and pushed towards Hengdu. End of this chapter.